Hello, welcome back. So today I wanted to talk about how to start working with a new deity. So I mentioned this a little bit, but for Yule this year, I have 13 different deities that I will be honoring over the 13 days of Yule, and that pretty much goes from the 19th to, I think it's like January 1st. So I've got, or maybe 31st. Regardless, like the rest of the year. And so each day I'll be working with a new deity and honoring them in different ways. And so I figured this was a prime time to talk about, as I'm starting to plan everything for that, how I go about starting a relationship with a new deity. So step number one is to research their myths. Now you don't need to become an expert on it, you don't need to become a reconstructionist and read it from the source material and really go in depth with this, but have a vague idea of what their stories are. Typically, most of the gods and goddesses are going to feature in a few different stories, so try and find what you can. They'll usually have like a main overarching story, but they, especially like for me, I'm looking into the Norse, typically they will pop up in a few different stories, such as if you look into Thor, he is in a lot of them. So usually you're gonna have to research the whole pantheon to find all of the different things like he would do. And for some, it's not as complicated. There are some that are only mentioned here and there. There's really not a whole lot that we know about, but perhaps there's a more modern take on this deity, whether it's a god or a goddess. Typically the gods have a little bit more knowledge. In our modern world, there's a little bit more written down than the goddesses, because sexism was a thing. I mean, it still is, but definitely writing down myths and things, it got real sketchy on what was written down. But try to find what you can. I mean, for example, there's not a whole lot on like Thor's wife per se. Like there's a teensy bit. I think there's like one or two stories where she's mentioned. So with that said, if I wanted to honor her, it would be little bits of knowledge to run off of, but regardless, look into their myths, look into their stories. Number two, have a dedicated space for them. Now, this could be a portion of your altar, or it could be a small altar space just for that particular god or goddess. And you don't need to worry about going and buying a bunch of stuff that other people have said are representative of them. Just pick a candle at most, or whatever you use as like your main central focus point. I use candles, that's where my practice started, so I always have a soft spot in my heart for candles. And then usually I like to have some kind of artwork for them, whether I've created it myself, or if I even just print out a picture and just, you know, tack it to my wall, like just something to represent them. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. Of course, if you end up working with them further along, you might want to add to it as you go, but just as the beginning, you don't need to worry about going and buying a bunch of stuff. Number three is to figure out what you're going to give as an offering. Now this can vary on your practice, what you feel like you should do. If you have a standard that you give to everyone that you call on, obviously probably go with that. For myself, I usually, if I don't have one in mind, I will give a stick of incense, and from there kind of figure out what I feel like would work best. Sometimes it's different types of teas or coffees. Other times it might be food items or like, you know, various wildlife feeds that you can find, you know, feeding the wild birds or the deer or whatever, foods that would help nature, especially animals that they're connected to. This works really good, for example, if you have like a goddess that's associated with birds, like magpies, for example. They love peanuts, so I might get some peanuts and leave those out. And inevitably they will find them and be very happy, and that's one way to give back. But if you don't have a whole lot, whatever your usual one is, works perfectly well. But I like to always give an offering as a thank you for bothering to listen to what I have to say. Number four is to figure out the amount of time that you are willing to dedicate towards building this relationship. So for me, it would be figuring out whether I want to go and talk to them daily or weekly or something along those lines, and figuring out exactly how much time at least I'm going to spend. So it might be 5 minutes that you're going to sit and try and communicate with them, or it could be up to like 30 minutes a day. It's just depending on your schedule, what you're able to do. Also pick a time frame, whether it's I just want to work with you for this season, or I feel like you need to help me with this particular aspect of my life, or I'm just feeling called to for some reason and I just want to explore that further. Usually a good time frame is about a month, so about a moon cycle. So maybe you want to start on a full moon and then connect with them, work with them, give offerings, whatever, up until the next full moon, and then check in and see where you want to go from there, if you want to continue or you feel like you accomplished what you needed to with them. Number five is to meditate / communicate with them. This is where I feel like it can get a little wobbly. Some people might argue that you shouldn't do that, or that you need to do it in a specific way. I feel like the gods know humans are crazy and we always have been, and they're perfectly fine to sit down and chat with us. It's not to say you need to bring them every little itty-bitty problem in your life, but just so that they get to know you. Now you can do this in a meditative state. There are a lot of guided meditations, especially if you're picking a more popular deity. There are plenty of meditations where you can sit down and have a person tell you a tale of going to meet a particular god or goddess. Or if you're well versed in doing your own meditations with the gods and visualization and stuff like that, you can easily do it yourself. During that point, that's when I would also go and approach and say why you're wanting to work with them. So it could be you feel like you want to work with them to overcome some issues involving like poverty, or it might want to do with love, or might want to do with happiness, or it could do with healing, or into a job that you're going into, or whatever aspect of your life. You might want to sit down and tell the god or goddess why it is you've picked them, or you're feeling called to them, whatever signs and stuff that seem to lead to that one. The last point kind of goes with that, which is to write down the why. So this could be in your journal, a book of shadows, whatever your sacred book is where you write down your thoughts on things. In there, ask yourself a couple questions. First one is obviously, why do you want to work with this one? Are there symbols that you're seeing? Are you just called to their myths? Try to write down why you're interested. Are you just liking the artwork you see of them? Or is it because a spell has told you that you need to call on them, and like myself, you might not feel comfortable just asking some random deity for their aid when you have absolutely no relationship with them. Also at this point, write down everything that you know about that particular god or goddess. Even if you're like, I have a name or I have this imagery, describe it, write it down, whatever little bits you have. Also write down what goals you want to have in that relationship with that god or goddess. And pretty much just any other important notes that you have about that deity, write those all down. And then go and look back at these after that time frame we talked about earlier, so about a month or a moon cycle later, or whatever you ended up choosing. And then compare, write down the same questions, but what you know now. What new information have you learned? What have you experienced from them? And then will you continue that relationship? Or are you going to let it just kind of fade away? You accomplish what you needed to with them. Write that all down. I think it's super important to compare what we learned and what we knew at the beginning and the after time period to see if you want to pursue further with that deity and that relationship. So anyways, this is a pretty simple and basic way that I go about starting a relationship with a new god or goddess. I hope this has been helpful. I'm curious what you guys do, if you have like a different set of things that you do, whether it's official like this kind of a list system or if it's just kind of more vague. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you would like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Do make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.